Hey everybody, welcome back to the Leonardo the Lion tutorial finishing series, and today we are gonna organize this chaotic little pile of ribbed swatches here and turn them into his finishings for his sweater. So just for the sake of making things visually better, I'm gonna move all of these little guys over to the side and just focus on the collar of his sweater. So this is the collar and button band of his sweater. This for all of your finishing seaming for the sweater. So as you can see from the diagram, the button band attaches, you're going to attach the button band, basically you want it to come down about a ½ inch below the color change here. And then we're going to be seaming it along the front of his body and then around his neck, and we have to flip it over so it gets this nice little shawl color look. Now there are no buttonholes on your button band because obviously it's a faux button band, so we're just going to be seaming the buttons directly on top of the ribbing. So there are no buttonholes, and you can choose whether or not to seam down both sides or just one side. I don't think it's necessary to seam down both sides, just because you're going to be adding those buttons on afterward, which is just going to like hold it down even more, and it'll also make it look more like a real sweater. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at what we're working with here. So I left these tails free for potential seaming. Now that I've looked at the instructions, I think that this one right here is probably going to get in the way, because I'm going to be using this tail right here as long as I can up the side, and I'm going to be able to use it past this point where this tail is. I don't know. Let's see. What do you think? Actually, let me make an amendment on that. I think that I can use this tail up to this point and then use this one for the rest of it, so we don't have to keep attaching. So this one's going to be kind of annoying when we're pinning it down, but let's just get to it. Okay, so the first thing that I did was a little test run just so I wasn't floundering around. Okay, so the first thing that I did was a little test run just so I wasn't floundering around while I'm trying to attach this. So I think the best way to pin this down is to start with the short side. So it's just gonna wrap around like this, with all of your bind offs are gonna be the side that's seamed down. So it's going to go around like this, and then it's going to cross over here, and then the button band is going to come down here. So I'm going to show you how to pin all of this down so that it doesn't drive you crazy, and we can get to seaming. So I think that the best way to start this, because this little tab right here is the part that's going to twist and tuck under the main part of the button band. So I think the first thing that I'm gonna do is figure out where I want this tacked down. So let's grab my trusty T-pins here, move my tapestry needle off to the side, grab some T-pins, and start pinning and see how you like this to lay. So this is gonna go basically like this eventually, and we want to make sure we can see that when it curves over, so we can make adjustments later if we need to, but let's just start basically just some basic pinning here. Now we're gonna have this, and I'm gonna want to sew kind of like overlap a little bit onto his chest applique so that it doesn't show this ridge line. So that's what I'm gonna try and do the best that I can, and then eventually sew it in along his neckline like Brenda says in her finishing instructions. So I'm gonna pin this here, and then I'm gonna turn him over and stretch that out a little bit. And I'm going to wait to pin this part because this is the part that kind of like curls up like a shawl collar in the back. And here's that bind off tail I was talking about earlier. So we're just I'm just laying this down, kind of figuring out where it's supposed to go. And this is the tricky part. This is where we're gonna figure out how to twist the front piece over for that shawl collar. So right now I'm pretty much liking where this is falling. So I'm gonna pin this here just to get it generally into the spot that I want it. I like how this is because I want it to fold up like this in the back, just like a real shawl collar cardigan. And now we're gonna figure out the tricky bits of how to make this easy to seam. So what we need to do is pin this bit down. So you see how I turn that over? Go back and watch it if it wasn't totally clear, but I just flipped it over so that this seam line stays right here. And then I'm gonna pin this down here so it stays where it needs to go. And then I'm gonna pin it again right here. Here we go, like that. And I really like that so far. That's looking good. And then for this one, we're gonna do a similar thing. So it's gonna it's gonna get seamed down underneath that button band so that it flips over. Now I'm just gonna stick a pin in there and we can see how that looks before I start sewing. So like I said, that's gonna overlap right there. And this is gonna start to look much better once we start seaming it on. It's gonna start looking like a real thing. And this will flip over a little bit more. So Brenda doesn't specifically say where to start seaming on this, so I'm gonna start seaming on it where I think it makes the most sense, which is with this tail down here. So that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna thread my tapestry needle with that tail. Now my tail actually ended here because this is the cast on edge, so I just pre-threaded it along this seam line here, or this edge right here, so that the tail is coming out of this edge instead of this edge. So let's get this party started. Let's see. Move that pin box out of the way. And I'm gonna take out this pin just because I don't need it anymore. And then I'm gonna start just like I have been before by going into the body first. And what I'm gonna do the best that I can is follow this row up, this column of stitches all the way up. So it's not zigzagging all over the place. If you can't get it, you know, it's fine. It's a toy. So just don't be too hard on yourself, but I'm gonna try and get this as even as I possibly can. And hopefully you can see where I'm going. So the yarn came out of the stitch below it. So I'm going in and I'm grabbing 2 ladders in between stitches, like so. And this is a little tricky for me to see just because I have my tripod sitting in front of me. So I'm gonna do my best to make this as clear as possible for you. But we're gonna go under those seams, those stitches again. Then we're gonna go under, and you see how this bind off is getting hidden underneath the seam here. It's just kind of like disappearing because I'm going in. So here's your bind off right here, and where I'm going in is right underneath that bind off row, or next to it since it's vertical right now. So we're just gonna keep on going. Now I want to go into the stitch I just came out of on either side. That's just a little bit of stuffing popping out. It's fine, it'll go away. Go like this. And you know, this is really great practice for just seaming in general, and learning how to ease in any sort of, you know, any sort of seam you're working on, because sometimes you have to take a little bit more from one side and not the other to make everything match up nicely, so you don't have like a puckered or gathered bit of fabric at the end of your seaming. So we're just going to keep on going up here. So let's catch up with me when I get up to the top here and start figuring out where my seaming transition is going to go from here. Okay, everybody, so here's where I am. I'm at the top of the quote-unquote button band right here with my seaming, and I've just followed that same column all the way up along the edge, and now I'm at the edge of his chest applique. So this is where we're going to start seaming the top of his collar down to the edge of his chest applique. So I know this looks really weird right now. It's kind of flipping out. So when we sew the buttons on, or you sew down this side of the button band, it's going to lay like this. See that? So don't worry about it popping up right now, and it actually makes it easier to seam when it's up like this, because you can see that it's just like naturally resting along this edge. And we're actually going to be sewing it this way. At least I think that's what I'm gonna do. It's either that, or I'm gonna seam it here and kind of switch from what I was doing, which was seaming it on the underside, or I'm seaming it on the right side. So now I think my best option is to seam it this way with this seam so that it rolls underneath. So let me just show you what that looks like. As you can see, I took out some of my pins here because they were getting in my way. So I just want it to basically lay like this now. So let's do it. So I'm just going to go into one more stitch here on the blue, on part of his sweater, and then up through his chest applique. Oops. Okay. Now that I've done that, I'm gonna switch over to this side. So let's see how this looks. Since we just went into one of his body stitches, let's go into his collar. And then, so I'm not going to go right into this edge here. I'm going to go one in because I want to hide this seam line and this seam line and the bind off on the collar. So what I want it to do is roll roll under, which is why I'm using this mattress stitch. See that? Let's do it again. And go under chest applique stitch, and then under one on his collar. See? Looking good. So just to show you what that's going to look like when it's closed. Ta-da! So we're almost, like I said, my other end is hanging out right here, so more than enough of this tail to make it to that other tail. So it came out over here. See how it came out? My yarn tail came out right there, my seaming tail. So now we're gonna go in just that one above it, like so. So another tip, if you need to, you can steam these pieces or wet block them before you start seaming. I didn't, just because I'm lazy and I was excited to start these tutorials for you. But you could do that, or just give them a gentle steam. Wash them, hand wash them, or give them a gentle steam to kind of help them shape up. But I didn't really think that was necessary for this, so I didn't. So let's just check our work. Look at how nice that's looking. There's that edge. I just came out of a chest applique stitch. So now would be a good time just to kind of check how everything's laying as far as easing this fabric in. So we want to make sure that there isn't too much fabric on one side or the other, because then it would start to look weird. So this is my center back right here, and they're falling in pretty much exactly the same spot on either side, which is great. That's what we want. So here's the start of the final bind off row, and then the start of the final bind off row is pretty much at the same spot on this side too, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. And we can work to help ease this fabric in as we go along. So what I'm gonna do is finish seaming this up to this tail here, and then I'll be right back. Okay everybody, so here we are with his collar seamed up to that second tail and the beginning of like the last bind off row in your collar that goes around his back neck. So I'm gonna hide this tail just like I have with all the other tails. So at this point in the seaming game, I have started to seam along his head because I've run out of chest applique to sew into. So you want to get as close to, when you go into his body, into his body stitches, you want to get to as close to underneath his head as possible, because we want this collar to sit snugly up against his head. So here's what that looks like when we hold it when it's down. So if you flipped it up, you would see a little bit of his chest applique, but we're never gonna see that. This is staying down like this. And once it's all secured, this will not be flipping up by itself naturally, especially with the correct button placement, because we want this to be a nice gentle fold over here. So your first button is probably going to be about here, and that's how it's going to sit. once it's all done. Okay, let's just get to hiding this tail, and I'm just going to go down through his body, put that to the side, pull that out, grab my scissors, and give it a trim. So there's basically the first half of his collar all done. So let's start working on the back part of his collar. Now, you're going to want to do, after you finish threading your tapestry needle, I'm just double checking as I go along just to make sure that this is laying where it needs to. And so I think it's looking pretty good, but always double check. Makes your life easier in the long run, your seaming life a lot easier in the long run. So since this is attached to the collar, the first thing I'm going to do is go into the body. So I'm just kind of digging for a stitch that's underneath his head first, and then I'm going to go back into a collar stitch. Like so. And I'm just going to repeat that over and over and over again. So follow this along, and soon I'm going to hit the seam line for his head, where his head is seamed on in the back, and then we're going to follow that seam line. So sorry if I moved out of frame a little bit. This is a tricky seam to film. So we've nearly reached that point where the seam of his head and the top of his shoulders meet. So should make this process a little bit easier. So again, this is sitting like so. As we get moving, so this is the center back right here. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure that I do this correctly, is put a pin right here. Okay, and the reason for that is that I don't want to have too much fabric on either side, and it just helps me gauge how many stitches to take from the shawl collar and the body. So like, as you can see, there's a little bit extra fabric on this side than there is on this side. So what I'm going to do is take one stitch from the head and take 1.5 stitches from the shawl collar. And what that's going to do is just help gather it in a very unnoticeable way. And once again, just as a reminder to myself and to everybody else doing this along with me, his mane is going to cover all of this. It's going to cover up all of this seaming right here, because you're attaching his little strands of his mane all over here, and it goes all the way down to the seam line for his collar. So it's a very forgiving project, as I've said before, even though this part can seem a little bit tedious. So here we are. This stuffing. popping out. We're almost at the center back. I'm gonna take this out because I don't need it anymore. Yeah, so just keep going like this. And now that I've reached the center back, which is right here, I'm just gonna do another little check on the fabric to make sure, see how that is laying right there? That's all good. It's all good. Just to make sure that I have everything still laying how I want it to. And it is, so there it is. And then there, my shoulder, flip him over. That's where we are so far. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna seam the rest of this down, and catch up with you guys in a minute. Okay, everybody, I'm back, and I've seamed all the way around his head. Whoop. Down here. And now I'm back at his chest applique. So what I'm gonna do is seam this bit down just like I did on this side, and making sure I leave enough to be able to twist this so that we can tack it down underneath the main part of the button band. So let's do it. I'll come back when I am right here at this pin. Okay. Hey guys, so I'm back. I have seamed down the collar all the way down to the tip of his chest applique. And now it's time to seam down the last little tab on his collar, which is going to get hidden underneath the right side of this button band, like so. So this is going to be pretty simple, since it's not a piece that's going to be visible. We just want it to like secure the twist in the fabric here. So what I'm going to do is, here's my tail. I'm just going to go into this stitch right along where I seamed before. And then I'm going to twist over the fabric. And let's see. Probably would have been better if I pinned this down, huh? I'm gonna go under that seam, that side, that edge stitch, and pin it and seam it down like that. See how that's holding like that? And I'm gonna come back and seam down this side too. Let's just watch here. So I just want to double check that I didn't do anything wonky over here. Nope, looks good. So it's gonna sit like that. And I'm just gonna go under these seam stitches here and sew this right on down. See that? So basically this is tacking. So I like the way that that looks. So now I'm just gonna go and seam this part down flat, go into a body stitch, and then a row stitch, and the body stitch, button band stitch. Great. So just go in and double check that as you're going along that everything is laying like you want it to. So I just, every once in a while, I'll go in here and take a look at it. Okay. Same thing along this side. Gonna go in, body stitch, edge stitch, and I'm not being as exacting with this as I was with the front side just because I know it's gonna get covered up. And it's such a little itty bitty bit of fabric here. So now let me just say, I think that out of all of the finishing for this little guy, this part for me I found to be the most difficult, just because it's awkward, a little bit awkward to sew it on. But once you get the hang of it, I think it goes along pretty smoothly. I think you just have to kind of like be okay with seaming and then taking out your seaming if you don't like the way that it's looking, which is totally fine. So now that I've looked at all of this, I know before I said that you didn't need to seam down this side because there were buttons on it, but now that I'm looking at this, I actually do think that I'm gonna seam down this side too, just to ensure that everything stays the way that I want it to. And luckily I have enough of this tail left to basically like do that. So I'm just gonna show you as least awkwardly as possible how to seam this down. So since I'm in a body stitch right now, I'm gonna come in right here. See that? I just went in and caught a stitch, pull, and then I go into a column, stitch column just like before, and then come back over here and grab a stitch on the edge of my collar. I'm so sorry that this looks so awkward. It's just I'm at a super odd angle for seaming this with my camera in front of me. Go in. Did I do that correctly? Did I go into the right one? Let me double check. Yeah, and that's how easy it is to take out a stitch. You just go back and yank on the fabric until you see where that stitch was coming out of. There you go. And we're just gonna go like that all the way down to the bottom. Pretty good. I'll be right back when I get all the way down to here. Okay. Okay, everybody, here he is in all of his glory. Those button bands sewn down. I really like the way that this looks, just because, you know, it's my lion and I can do what I want with him. But if you don't want to seam down this side, there's like, you know, that's totally your call. I'm just showing you what I'm doing for my lion. So I'm going to leave this part down here open because the ribbing on the bottom I am going to leave open. I'm only seaming down the top side of it so that the bottom hangs loose, because that's what I want to do. And that's what the original lion has going on as well. So I'm just going to seam that down, tack that under like so, give it a snip. All right. So now we're going to put on the bottom ribbing for his sweater. Okay, so I've seamed around all the way his little center center back booty area, right above his tail. So it's all seamed here. And now I'm just going to keep going around. So what I did was, there definitely was a little bit extra ribbing than there was body. So just like before, I eased in the fabric and I grabbed about a stitch and a half to 2 stitches from the ribbing to 1 stitch to the body, every couple of stitches to help gather some of the fabric. So that is it's just a really good way to learn how to ease in fabric. So yeah, I think he looks pretty good. You see his little ribbing kind of hides the top of his tail. And so I'm really liking how that looks. So let's just keep on seaming. Turn him around. Oops, sorry guys. Keep bumping the camera. Sorry about that. So let's just keep on seaming. So the last stitch I did was in the body, so I'm going to go into the ribbing. I'm going to go into body stitch again. And we're just going to keep doing that until the very end. So I'll come back once I am back at the center front. Okay, so we're back. I just finished sewing down the rest of his ribbing, and I actually went ahead and seamed down this little side right here too, so it matches up at the bottom of his button band. So I'm just going to show you how I did that, except I'm going to do it from this side. Now obviously my yarn tail on this side started up here because I was in this top corner because I was coming around and went down like this, but for this one the yarn is down in the bottom because this is my cast on edge, the ribbing. So what I'm going to do is just go into the side of his ribbing right here, pull that down. So what this does is it helps the ribbing lie flat because it naturally wants to curl up. So what I'm going to do after I'm all done with this is I'm just going to steam him a little bit, just to help these seams lie flat. It's the same thing that you would do in sewing or in blocking after you've sewn together a sweater to help the seams lie flat and just kind of like figure out where they want to be. That's a really common thing to do. So I went into my first stitch down here, and now I'm going to go into the edge stitch on the ribbing, give it a little tug, and then go into the side of his button band again, and then up through the side of his ribbing, the edge stitch, and that's it. That's all you gotta do. So now I'm just gonna hide this inside of his body here, and trim the end. So that's it for his bottom ribbing. And you see how it's kind of flipping up in the back here? That's totally cool. So that's where I'm going to be steaming it. So if you don't have a steamer, you can use the steam setting on your iron to help all of these edges lay flat. So what I do is I put a damp, just like a lightly damp towel over my knitting, just so that I don't burn anything or cause any harm to the fabric that I've created. And I do this on sweaters too. And then I just take a hot iron on high steam setting and I just lightly press it. I'll just lightly press it down over the ribbing where I want it to lay flat, and it will help just kind of like loosen up this hard edge and help it lay down flat. And I will come back and show you the final product when I have everything done. All right, so let's sew on his cuffs next. So it's the same deal as for the bottom ribbing. You're just gonna come in and find that you're gonna just come in and sew it down, basically like just one stitch above where the color change happens. So let's go ahead and pin this guy down. So I want the seam for this to be over here, like where it would normally be if you were making a garment for a person. So your seam is usually right here on the underside of your arm. So since I want the ribbing to start there, I'm just gonna pin it down over here, and then do the same thing on the opposite side. So that I have some guidelines. Okay, so I'm not going to be using this end at all because I'm going to go around and then I'm just going to seam this cuff together right here. So this end will end up just I'll just weave in this end when I'm all done seaming. And I'm going to repeat that same process on both sides. So let's just get started by threading the tapestry needle. And since the yarn is coming from the ribbing, I'm gonna go into an arm stitch first. So I'm just gonna take out this and hold it down and go into a stitch that's 2 above the color change. And that's going to be my guideline for the entire time that I'm seaming. So I'm just going to go in to that next stitch over. What I love about working in this dark navy, even though it is admittedly kind of hard to see while I'm sewing, especially since I can't put my face right up next to it while I'm filming. It hides any small inconsistencies in my seaming too, so it does have its benefits. So if you do choose to work his sweater in a dark color, that is one of the benefits of it. So bundles for Leo are available on the website, so you can actually choose whatever colors you would like to use for him. I really like the golds as his body color because I think it best matches a real lion. But if you want to go a little bit more cartoony with him, or fantasy lion, there are so many colors to choose from, and I really can't wait to see what people do. Okay, so here I am just seaming along. You can see the seam is going along swiftly, so I'm going to come back once I am all the way around and show you how I seam this cuff together and finish it up. Okay, so finished sewing on his little cuff, and I just have to seam up the side right here. So I'm going to do this just like I did on the bottom of the ribbing when I was attaching it to the button band. You're just going into the edge stitches like so. seaming them together. So again, just like the bottom ribbing, it might flip up on you a little bit right now, but again, if you steam it after you're all done, all of these are gonna lay perfectly flat for you. Look at that. Ta-da! There's one little cuff. So I'm just gonna seam this in. I mean, not seam it, weave it in. Weave in my ends. Like so. And I'm just gonna go along the bottom edge. Now I wove in my other end right here. So this side already has one end hidden away, so I'm gonna go in the other direction for this one, just so that I don't have the edge too bulky on one side, and it's easier to get my needle through this way too, because there isn't already another strand of yarn hiding in that cast on edge. There we go. Do me a little tug, snip. There we go. Okay, I'm just gonna go and finish up his other cuff in the same way. And then I'm gonna come back and show you how to put on his little faux pocket right here. Okay. Okay, so I'm back for the last little piece of his sweater finishing. And that is just the ribbing for his little faux pocket right here. So I've gone ahead and pinned it down before I started filming, and I'm going to use this long tail from the bind off edge of this little bit of ribbing to sew down, across, and up, because I want this edge to stay loose. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn them around first and foremost, so that I'm at the right angle for seaming. I'm going to turn him like this, and looks like you can see him pretty good. So I'm going to fold back his little arm like that, so I have the best view. And I'm just going to go into a body stitch, and then I go back into an edge stitch. Now let's see. Let me see if I can tilt my light here so you can definitely low tech ring light angling here. Quarantine has made inventors of us all. Okay, so there's the side seam down, and then I'm just going to go along this bottom edge. Like so. I'm going to go into first stitch on the ribbing along the bottom edge. Together. I'll go under a body stitch like so. Ooh, sorry. I just use one pin to hold this down. Let me lay him down flat now, because I can probably attempt to seam with my left hand here. See how that works out, so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to take this pin out, because you know what? It's in the way. Let's get rid of that. Just going to hold it down. Go under about a stitch and a half on the ribbing. And then under a body stitch, about the same place. Stitching the ribbing. Now this is one of those pieces that we're kind of like tacking on. In this piece I'm gonna weave that piece in. I'm not gonna use that at all for sewing. Go in. I actually caught a bit of the next body stitch that I needed, so I'm just gonna go right into this edge stitch here. And then back down through this body stitch right here. And that is pretty much it. So again, when I go back and steam everything, I'm gonna steam this as well. So it lays just a little bit better, but I think it looks pretty good. I'm gonna go back in to the top edge here and just secure it so it lays down a little bit better. And go down and through his body. Oop, come on, getting stuck in the stuffing. And pull it down and through and give it a little snip. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this as well. Oops. Just going to hide it inside of his body. And stuffing is so thick. Come on. There we go. Gonna pull that through. You see the stuffing, just the stuffing that it looked like I was upending just went right back in. So that's it. That is Leonardo's sweater finishing. Next up, we're gonna sew on his eyes, and then I'm gonna show you how to cut and sew on the his felt eyelid and his felt nose next.